Welcome back to the channel. My name is John Bloomfield. I'm a photographer from the northeast of England, and I want to talk to you today about a subject that's become a particular issue, I think, online, constructive criticism, and why I think, for the most part, it has become a pointless exercise. Now, I'm talking here about giving constructive criticism rather than necessarily receiving, but we'll move on to that eventually. When you give constructive criticism, it's not about you. It's not about your opinion. It's not about what you believe the facts of photography to be, or what you believe the rules of photography to be, or what you believe the conventional wisdom in photography is. So, giving constructive criticism to somebody who posts a photograph online of a particularly nice landscape and just puts open for CC is an impossible task, really, unless you understand what that person is trying to achieve. And if they haven't taken the time to explain to you what their artistic vision is and what they are hoping to achieve when they take that photograph, what they want to show, what they want the viewer to feel, what they want the viewer to look at, then any constructive criticism you give them is not going to be helping them to move their photography towards achieving their vision. It's only going to be helping them move towards what you think is correct or what your vision is. And that's not really helpful. If we accept that we all have different visions and different things that we want to achieve, and we're not merely documentarians of reality, then it becomes harder to feel that there are rules to be enforced or generic criticism that you can give. Sometimes when people move to a certain level in photography, they start breaking the photographic rules deliberately because they want to break those rules deliberately. A really good example that I've noticed a lot lately in cinematography is in portraiture. When you study portraiture books and you look at historic portraiture, photographic portraiture, one of the things you're taught is that a correct portrait, I hate using the word correct, but traditionally a rule of portraiture would be that you would focus on the eye that is nearest to the camera. That's the most comfortable thing for the person viewing the image to see, is when they look at the picture, they will look at the eyes first most of the time if the photograph's been well composed, and they will naturally, as they would in the real world, look at the closest eye first, and that is comfortable. But something that I've noticed a lot in cinematography is a deliberate focusing on the eye furthest away from the screen and not the one closest. The cinematographers are doing this to make the viewer feel uneasy. I first noticed this recently in a TV series called Des on ITV, starring David Tennant playing the serial killer Dennis Nielsen, in which as he was having his perfectly friendly conversations with other members of the cast, the cinematographer would focus on the eye furthest away. So while he looked like a perfectly normal man sat in a suit talking perfectly pleasantly to somebody, by shifting the focus onto the back eye instead of the front eye, subconsciously the viewer is made to feel slightly uneasy. And you can do that in portrait photography as well if you want to make the photograph seem a little bit uneasy. But if you don't explain to people that you've done that deliberately and why you have done it, then online they will tell you you've made a mistake. If you post that in a photography group and you do that, you will immediately get somebody come along and tell you should have focused on the closest eye. Both parties are at fault here. The photographer who's posted his image seeking constructive criticism should always take the time to explain what he is trying to achieve, or she. It totally bemuses me why people feel it's important to post what the shutter speed was, what the aperture was, what the ISO was, what flash they were using, where the flash was positioned, etc., without ever stating what their actual vision for the image was. What were you trying to achieve? That's what the person needs who's going to give you constructive criticism. And equally, jumping in and giving constructive criticism to somebody who hasn't bothered to tell you what they are trying to achieve is not really helping them to achieve anything. All it's doing is tell them what you would like them to do, what you would like to do if you were taking that image, which may arguably have some sort of value, but it's not really helping them to achieve their artistic vision. Now, don't get me wrong, some constructive criticism online of that nature can be useful and helpful, especially for beginners when their priorities are not achieving their artistic vision most of the time. They are about making sure the picture is in focus, understanding how to manage depth of field, understanding how to manage image noise. They are technical things. And sometimes an artist will also deliberately mess up the technical things. I'm trying to think who it was, but there's somebody I know who posts images all the time, extremely good images, where they've cranked the ISO for no other reason than they want to introduce digital noise. And if you didn't know that they were deliberately doing this because they wanted to introduce a digital noise, because they want to create that feeling of dirty grunginess, almost like a CCTV camera, a voyeuristic image. There's no sexual content actually, but the feeling that you shouldn't be looking at this image, then you would probably tell them, why on earth have you exposed it like that? You could have slowed your shutter speed right down and actually had a lower ISO and a cleaner image. But they choose to use digital noise rather than to add film grain in post-production. But anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. In the early days, it is useful to tell somebody, actually, if you'd slowed your shutter down, you would have gotten a little bit of motion blur, or you would have eliminated the motion blur. Those things can be helpful, and they are helpful to beginners in helping them to achieve a technical understanding of how to capture an image. But once we move away from technical understanding of how to create an image onto creating a work of art, or capturing the artist's vision or the photographer's vision, then we move away from those technical things. We have to assume an understanding of how to capture the image by the photographer. And once we can make that assumption and we understand that they may deliberately have chosen to do those sort of things, we need to know what they're actually trying to achieve in order to give genuine constructive criticism. Now, I know loads of you are going to totally disagree with me. I know in lots of the photography groups I'm in, there is a constant campaign from people saying, please post your EXIF data, tell us what the shutter speed was. And it's all bollocks, really. It doesn't really matter. The shutter speed is only relevant as to whether you did or didn't capture motion. The f-stop is only relevant as in whether you got the depth of field you wanted or didn't want. The ISO is only relevant as to whether there's been too much noise, not enough noise, whatever you want to achieve. And those things will change depending on the scenario in which you're taking the photograph. So trying to repeat somebody's settings is never going to really be helpful. You would be much better spending your time watching some videos on YouTube or reading some books about the exposure triangle and how it works. And once you understand the exposure triangle, you will understand that there's no such thing as a correct exposure. You might get that 0 on your meter, and you might get that nicely spread histogram, but that doesn't make it a correct exposure. It's perfectly valid to blow the highlights. It's perfectly valid to crush the shadows. You may want a dark and moody image. You may want a bright and overpowering image. It's about achieving your artistic vision. So you do need to understand the exposure triangle, and you do need to understand the technicalities. But I don't think posting an image and asking for constructive criticism is the right way to understand how to get the exposure that you want, or trying to copy somebody else's EXIF details. Just take 10 minutes and watch some videos on the exposure triangle, read a book on the exposure triangle, or getting started with photography, and you'll get that nailed very quickly. It's not complicated, not as complicated as people want to make it seem. And then you can move on to trying to achieve what you actually want to achieve. I know I've rambled a lot in this video, and I appreciate it, especially if you've stuck to the end. Feel free to tell me that I'm talking absolute rubbish in the comments below, but it remains my opinion, and you're unlikely to change it, frankly. It's come after a year of trying to engage a little bit more, take on a bit more stuff. But anyway, if you're going to ask for constructive criticism, be prepared to explain what your vision is, and be prepared to ignore the people who have ignored your explanation of what your vision is. That's what I would say. And don't feel bad about it. If you're on Facebook, feel free to block them. It's not, if somebody's not going to be helpful, and they're never going to be helpful, and they're always going to be a pain in the arse, then just block them. It's a private club, and you can make it as nice as you want to. Anyway, I got that tip from Al Birkin a long time ago. One of the best things anybody's told me about social media: if somebody isn't helpful, if they're always going to be a pain, just block them. Just move on. You don't have to. You wouldn't go to the same bar that they were in every night if they were a pain, would you? So why allow them to harass you on social media? It's supposed to be social anyway. Anyway, thanks for listening. If you like any of the content of this channel, I would really appreciate it if you subscribed. It would really be helpful if I could get the subscriber numbers up a little bit, because then YouTube will allow me to unlock a few things like live streaming from mobile devices and things like that. But anyway, thanks for watching. Take care. See you soon.